Well, again, thanks everyone for being here at 8:30 in the morning. I know it's first session of the day, and really not a super interesting topic at face value, but it's really important work to have voter equality. And the story in Georgia is one that was nationally reported on. It had a lot of eyeballs on it, and we were lucky enough to work on the solution that helped Georgia get ready for a handful of elections. So I will get right into it. All right. I'm Ben Masters. I'm a project manager for Blue Raster. We were just talking about it, but we're based in Arlington, Virginia. That said, I do live here in North Carolina, so it's great to be here at NCGIS. I was here in 2023. It's great to see this conference still picking up steam and growing. So I'll, like I said, just introduce myself. I'll tell you a little bit about what Blue Raster does and what some of our core capabilities are. And then we will dive into the project, give some project background, context, timeline, and then share some of the requirements that we solved and the technologies and approaches we used to solve those and all the fun and challenging things we learned along the way. So that'll cover analysis and automation, the WebGIS systems of engagement, and also the training we use to ensure stakeholder buy-in and make this project successful. So, like I said, Blue Raster is an Esri Gold business partner. We've been a Gold business partner for the better part of 2 decades. We are a small business. We're only about 40 people, but we have a global footprint, and we like to say small but mighty. Founded in 2002, and we've been kind of aligning and adapting and innovating with Esri throughout that time. And this project we're going to share today, we actually partnered with Esri Professional Services on. So some of our core capabilities, we specialize in GIS and web application development. We do a lot of really great work with field GIS, so a lot of really detailed and custom integrations with field maps and Survey 123. We have a cloud and managed services DevOps practice, so we do all sorts of ArcGIS Enterprise, migrations, deployments, upgrades, patching, all that fun stuff. And we support all industries. So we do a lot with state and local government, especially in the last 5 years. We work with the federal government, although a little bit less so here in the last couple of months and weeks. And we work with nonprofits as well as commercial entities. So like I was saying, we've grown our state and local practice quite heavily over the last 5 years. This is just an example of some of the places where we are working across the United States. And the core capabilities, again, we're supporting these counties, cities, and state governments with our web application development, field GIS, integrations, custom applications, ArcGIS Enterprise, real-time GIS with ArcGIS Velocity, GeoEvent, et cetera, and also just general staff augmentation. So some of the smaller cities out there, they don't have GIS departments, and we often serve as that GIS department. And here are just some of the representative clients that we're working with or have worked with. And the one you don't see on there, of course, is the Georgia Secretary of State, because we are going to get right into that right now. All right, so like I said, we worked with the Georgia Secretary of State in partnership with Esri Professional Services, specifically their elections division, to develop a rapid QA and QC tool and process to support the redistricting coming out of the 2020 redistricting cycle, and then also when those districts were challenged and ultimately redrawn and accepted in 2023. So that timeline looks a little bit like this. Prior to 2020, the U.S. Census Bureau is conducting the 2020 survey or census. By the summer of 2021, those results specifically for redistricting were published, and the Georgia legislature ended up passing those new district maps in the winter of 2021. After they were passed, they were challenged in court, but the courts ruled that you could continue to use these temporarily as they were kind of being reassessed for the upcoming election. And that is when Georgia kind of realized, oh crap, we don't really have a good process for shifting all these voters for all of our new districts. So that's when Blue Raster was engaged by Esri Professional Services. And then we we developed this first iteration that took several months, and then we had several months of processing the results to support the election in November of 2022. And then moving in after the election of 2022, the courts essentially ruled after lawsuits that the districts were in fact unconstitutional and they needed to be redrawn. And that put us in a bit of a pinch because that happened, those were accepted in December of 2023, and there was a primary in March of 2024. So thankfully, we had this tool on standby to pick back up and run that process again. And today, the tool kind of sits on standby, ready for the next processing of new districts. So what are some of the questions that we had to answer with this process? So in working with the state of Georgia, there was a lot of moving pieces. The first one being, how do we process 7.8 million registered voters 3 times per week? And that in itself was a bit of a challenge, and we'll get into how we solve that. Not only that, how do we then visualize all of those records on a map in a way that is easily digestible and only accessible to the people that should be able to see it? How do we then kind of take that information and disseminate it to all of the people making those changes 3 times a week, or working really 7 days a week to get their records to review count down from the millions to just a rounding error? And then how do we control all of the access? How do we have this system of engagement? How do we get stakeholder buy-in so that this is successful and ultimately the counties and then the state are in compliance with the court mandates? So we're going to get right into how we worked to process these 8 million records 3 times a week, how we automated our publishing and distribution of that data, and how we ultimately had this small 4 or 5 step process that they saw from the outside, how we simplified that for them, because this is what it actually looked like. This is every step and every process we had to account for in development of this tool, and it was a rapid development cycle because they were under the gun, a race condition, if you will. So I know that looks complicated. We won't be going into every single one of these, but I will hit them all at a high level. All right, talking about the data processing and things we learned in this part of the project. So like I said, we had to process 7.8 million registered voters 3 times a week continuously for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. What we learned about geocoding is that the state of Georgia does not necessarily have the greatest state-level geocoder, so we made the decision to use Esri's Street Map Premium product. We got better results with this than the World Geocoder product, and we worked actually with the Esri geocoding product lead to understand why we were initially seeing geocoding times taking 3-4 days for our first attempts at geocoding 8 million records. And what we learned was we needed to stand up one of the beefiest Amazon EC2s you can think of. So a GPU-backed instance, 128 gigabytes of RAM. All of that RAM was allocated to all the various processing cores on that machine, and what we had to do was load Street Map Premium into memory. So we took the whole geocoder and loaded it into RAM, and that cut the processing time from online, which was 3 or 4 days, into 16 to 20 hours, depending on the day. So we would run that kind of at the end of the day and overnight, and then by the morning we would have results. Now, what happens with all of these records that we've now geocoded on the map? Well, this is where we developed automation using the ArcGIS API for Python, as well as other Python libraries to run the spatial analysis and then chunk up the results and publish it in a data pipeline. So our analysis is actually relatively simple. I imagine most folks in here are familiar with GIS. Imagine simple desktop GIS actions and analyses just at the scale of 8 million. So it's a simple intersect. Here's my voter on the map. Here's what it intersects with in these new boundaries. Let's compare that result to what the Georgia voter system of record says it should be intersecting with. And if there's disagreement, that's when we flag it in the attributes. And that's how we determine the voter record count that needs to be reviewed. So this is just one sample of one of the CSV outputs from that process. You can see that we have these various attribute fields that we added, and these kind of flag and inform the system of engagement to say, do I agree with the US congressional district? If yes, then no issue. If I don't agree, what am I in, and how do I change that to what it should be? So you can see these raw data outputs are then kind of published into a nice user interface there, pictured on the bottom. All right, so we've solved the data problem. We've solved the processing. Relatively simple spatial operations, but at scale often causes issues. Well, now we need to understand how the heck do we get people to see and use this data every day until the election to get their voters the ballots that they need. The tool we decided to use was ArcGIS Hub Premium. We thought that this would be the best way to organize and disseminate the data, as well as control for data and user governance. So what we did was developed with templating and the ArcGIS kind of hub py module, a hub site where each county had its own page, each county had its own open data group and page, so they could only see their own data, as well as each county had its own web map and dashboard fed by that web map. Our automated process would, at the end of geocoding, update all of those maps, all of those services, so that we controlled access. What we also did was create a state-level executive view that aggregated all of these statistics at a state level and helped hold the counties accountable by providing them the tools they needed to essentially call people out for not fixing their records. Some of the interesting kind of automation techniques we discovered at this time, and this was in 2022 when the HubPy module was kind of still in development. It was just kind of a GitHub repo at the time, and in that sense it was a bit buggy and maybe not fully fleshed out, but what we did was we created template pages, template maps, template apps, template dashboards, and we were able to essentially iterate through scripting creation of all of these specific applications, dashboards, pages, 2 different groups for each county, the state level groups, and all of the users as well. So we used community users with very specific naming conventions to control for things like turnover. What if someone left an elections office in a county? What if we wanted to, what if we needed to clear out all of these county users because something changed? Well, some best practices we discovered were to use really consistent naming conventions for all of the hub community users. That allows us to easily select certain subsets of users, move them around or take them out of different groups, or just completely remove their access should something come up where we need to do that. And the other thing we did was just provided as much of an enriching and engaging experience as possible for the state level and county level users. So over on the left, you can see what a typical kind of dashboard view looked like. It gives you your overall records to review count. It breaks down the count by which districts disagree, and if it's multiple, it'll say that as well. If you were to zoom into the map, you can get all the way down to the voter address point level and see and click on voters and click on things and have a stylized pop-up. This is this voter. This is the unique ID of this voter. Here's what disagrees. We found this to be really helpful, not so much in the middle of districts, but rather at the edges. That is where most of the issues occurred with misassigned voting districts. So especially at the edges of districts and the edges of counties is where a lot of manual human effort was needed to adjust voters. We discovered that certain new voting districts like cut apartment buildings in half. So how do you handle that? Well, thankfully Blue Raster is not the expert in that, and all we were responsible for was identifying, hey, this record is wrong and you should go fix it. The other thing we did to hold folks accountable was create these user KPI dashboards for the state level executives. This is pulling last login and a couple of other stats. So say I'm Blake Evans, who's the state of Georgia elections director, and Bibb County, Georgia hasn't logged in. Well, Bibb County, your record count to review is over 100,000. Get to it, what are you doing? So this held everyone accountable and ensured that records to review count was going down every day that we ran this process. All right, so this is all great and good, and we developed a really cool thing, and like us as GS professionals are like really stoked about all of this cool automation and this cool hub site and all these maps and apps. Well, the 159 voting officials at all of the counties are not us. They are not GIS people. And while it might be cool to see this stuff for the first time, many of them had never, ever, ever seen their voters on a map. So just that alone was kind of mind-blowing to them and kind of was the hook for them to get into the system and use it. But that said, we still needed to provide a lot of guardrails for the state of Georgia through training. So we took a train-the-trainer approach. We worked with the elections division to develop really detailed, specific training that we conducted a couple of times with state elections officials, and they were able to take that training and then hold their own trainings with various groups of county officials. We defined, hey, these are all the outputs that you should expect. You have this click pattern on your page to log in and then go to the open data portal. You pull down your CSV and you work that CSV and have your records come back the next time we process it to see your progress. So we had a lot of really successful trainings, and that was ultimately what led to this project being a success and what led to the state of Georgia being in compliance with the court mandates. All right, so results. This process, looking back on it now, was really successful. In the moment, we probably did not feel like that. There were a lot of 8, 9, 10, 11 p.m. calls and huddles trying to troubleshoot what the heck was going on. Even calls into the early morning, feeling the pressure of this race condition to not let down the state of Georgia. That said, we were able to get through a lot of this stuff in partnership with Esri, a lot of tech support, a lot of work with professional services, but that first stat on the top is specifically related to the second go-around when we had already developed this system and we were just ready to use it. So when those new districts came in December of 2023, 3.5 million voters were misassigned. And in a matter of 8 weeks of processing three times a week, we were able to get that number down to about 20,000. Up on the top left, you can see Blake Evans, who is the elections director for the state of Georgia, actually using the tool and the training materials there on his right monitor in a news story from around this time last year. So that was really cool to see. And ultimately, this tool helped the state of Georgia be in compliance with all of the court mandates. It allowed voters to have the correct ballots assigned, and it opened the eyes of county officials to the power of GIS in elections. We started to have individual counties reach out to us in Georgia trying to replicate this for their local elections. So we've successfully done this now with Macon County, DeKalb County, Fulton County, and others in Georgia. And ultimately, this tool now sits ready and waiting for the next redistricting cycle and is something that can be repeated for other states or other counties. So that pretty much does it for my presentation. This was a super high level of what was a really intensive technical development process, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yeah. Okay.
As somebody who's been asked to do a GIS thing for a town, I'm still amazed
Yep.
They're relying on paper, or they're relying on, I don't know what they're relying on to assign people. How many, how many mismatches in the first round?
It's a little scary, but it was between 6 and 7 million
Wow.
out of 7.8 million. Yep. Full transparency, I took over this project as the project manager going into this second round, so I had to quickly learn all about what we did and how it works. But going back to our records, in developing this presentation, actually, I saw numbers touching the 6 millions. So, yeah.
On the templates, it sounds like it's almost like, um, what, how did you fill them out? Was that totally automated, for every county by the time you were done?
Yeah, so we basically published individual feature services and created individual maps to then hydrate all of those maps and apps. It works at this scale for like 100 to 200 maps. We have another project where we have 1,300 of something like this. And in that case, we actually used URL parameters in tools to ensure that folks could not. You can kind of pan around and find other data, but we are kind of trusting, and in that case, it's not as sensitive, but we're trusting that you're just going to kind of stick to your own district and look at your own stuff. So it was all templated. It was all, the template creation is not automated, but the actual publishing and updates of the templated apps was all automated coming out of the geocoding process.
So, how did that work if something was mismatched and you had two separate counties, two separate people? I mean, how
Yeah.
do you resolve that?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. It's certainly something that the state and counties work together on. We identified it. So our records were organized at the county level. So you were only seeing records that fell within your county boundary and ultimately the districts that kind of came within your county. So there wasn't necessarily, there were some edge cases where voters fell outside the county due to the geocoding results. And at that point, it's a little bit out of our hands, and we kind of are like, hey, you should go fix this. I don't know what their process was necessarily.
So, as far as editing capabilities go, if you are bin masters and you've got, Fulton County, you can certainly note and say for sure this person's not supposed to be in mine, but you can't necessarily say that person in a neighboring county is supposed to be in mine.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, and Blue Raster was not the ones editing
Right.
any of the results. It was, and there's certainly like a small percentage of 8 million where the geocoder struggled. So those were like the edge cases that required like the most human input.
Would there be any sense in the future of doing like a buffer around each county so that you can capture the most of those that,
I don't think so, because ultimately, if you're registered kind of in that county, like that county election official needs to, you don't want to end up like, there could be a county line like in a really densely populated area and you don't necessarily want to capture other parts of the county. We had some questions back here as well I want to get to.
I was going to say, my question kind of relates, is kind of two parts. Does Georgia use a unified statewide election management system?
Yes.
Or do they have separate ones for each county?
Yes.
And if so, when you do have counties that don't agree on their boundaries, was there any it kind of fills in with that? So.
Yes. So the first time we did this, Georgia used a system called eNet, and that was the system of record. They're currently kind of rolling out a new system called Jarvis. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it does essentially the same thing. We pull the export out of that, they make the edits, and amongst themselves kind of update that system, and then the next time we pull it down from the statewide system, you see the results reflected there. To your second question about how do folks maybe coordinate across counties, I imagine that they worked with some of the state elections officials to help coordinate that. There was a lot of collaboration amongst the state and counties, especially in problem areas. So I think that's something they worked out together, but we didn't necessarily have deep insight or knowledge into how they handle those. Question in the back?
Have there been any other states that have been interested in this type of process?
Good question. We hope so. But we have not necessarily seen much interest in this exact process. We would love to talk to other elections officials, though, at the state level and share this story. I know Sam here from Esri works at the state level. He was mentioning some states in the southeast that we might talk to because it could be interesting to them.
There have been some that did it not through a premium, but through just raw enterprise of users. But the interface was not as nice as this.
Yeah, so not only was there data processing and automation development, we also had to bring in our UI UX team to make it look good and have the folks want to use it. So it was a full spectrum project. Any other questions?
You said at the beginning, or maybe middle, out of 7.8 million records, there were up to 6 million mismatched.
Yeah.
Like, the vast majority of voters are not assigned to the correct district.
Yeah, there was at least like one type of mismatch, and that number fell off very rapidly after that, and that could be because of tweaks to our system or the way we were processing it, but ultimately that was the highest number I saw.
Or was that a relic of the fact that there were new districts drawn?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the new districts coming out of 2020 were all basically coming out of ENET, like for the first time, they just weren't assigned properly at all. So the first round was like, everything is getting addressed. 75% of the voters need to have the right assignments now. And then that number fell off a cliff really quick in the first couple of weeks. And then it was all the stuff, oh, I'm outside the county. Oh, I'm an apartment building cut in half. I'm right on the edge of X boundary or Y boundary. And that's the stuff that required all the extra attention.
Was it truly incorrect based on their first pass of trying to get people into the right county?
I think it was a relic of their ENET system being inflexible to the new district boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. I don't want to cause cascading delays with the sessions. So I'm happy to talk to anyone else at our booth or outside, and I appreciate all the questions. And yeah, thanks for listening.